Ever find yourself wishing that building a web app could be, I don't know, a little simpler? Like something that just works, whether you're on your phone, tablet, or laptop.
More dependable for sure. And faster. Definitely faster.
That's the dream, right?
Yeah.
Instant access, smooth performance, doesn't matter what device you're using.
Absolutely.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're diving into that very topic. We're going to explore how Microsoft Azure, the cloud platform, of course,
Yeah.
is kind of changing the game for building these things called progressive web apps. PWAs for short.
Yeah, for those who might not be super familiar, a PWA, you can think of it like getting that same smooth, responsive experience you'd expect from a native app, the kind you download from an app store.
Right.
But the whole thing lives right there in your web browser. It loads quickly, works offline sometimes even, and the look and feel stay consistent across all your devices.
Precisely. So our mission today is to really unpack how all these different services, all these tools that are part of Azure, are making it easier to build these PWAs.
That's right.
And more importantly, we want to highlight the real advantages this brings to, well, you, the person using these apps every day.
Absolutely.
To get into this, we've been looking at this really insightful article on ViASTUDY. It's titled Azure and Progressive Web Apps, PWAs.
Yeah, it really nicely lays out how these two things kind of work together.
Okay, so let's dive right into the foundation here. The article really emphasizes this thing called Azure App Service. What exactly is that, and why should someone building a PWA, why should they care about it?
Okay, so Azure App Service, you can think of it like a fully managed platform in the cloud, like this workshop, that's specifically set up for building, deploying, and scaling web applications.
Okay.
Now, for PWAs, this is particularly useful because it handles a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, the complexities that developers would otherwise have to deal with themselves.
Such as, give me some examples. What kind of headaches does it take away?
Well, the article highlights a few key features that are really perfect for PWAs. One is automatic scaling. So say your PWA suddenly becomes really popular, like it explodes in popularity.
Right.
App Service can automatically handle the increased traffic and demand without you having to manually adjust anything.
So it grows with you?
It grows with you. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like your app automatically getting stronger when it needs to.
Okay.
There's also built-in load balancing, which is kind of like directing traffic on a busy highway, right? Making sure everything keeps moving smoothly and prevents things from getting jammed up.
Right, no bottlenecks.
Exactly. And that ensures that your PWA stays responsive for everyone.
Okay.
And then, for developers, something that's really huge is this thing called continuous deployment from Git repositories.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine like a shared document where all the app's code and changes are tracked.
Okay.
App Service makes it super easy to push those changes live automatically, so updates get to users faster and more efficiently.
Gotcha. So it's not just about handling more traffic, right? It's about freeing up developers to think bigger, to be more ambitious, and not have to worry about whether their app can actually cope with that success.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Now, the article also mentions Azure functions. What are those, and how do they fit into the PWA world?
So Azure functions, there's these things called serverless functions.
Okay.
They're basically little snippets of code that run only when they're needed,
Right.
triggered by specific events. Think of it like when you click a button on a website,
Right. Yeah.
something happens in the background.
Could trigger something.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And for a PWA, this is really helpful for handling what we call back-end logic, all the stuff that happens behind the scenes. So things like processing your login, saving your preferences, fetching data, all that can be done by Azure functions.
Okay.
They're like these specialized helpers that only show up when there's a specific job to be done. I like that analogy. So it sounds like it keeps the front end of the app, the part that you see, nice and lean, focused on that smooth experience, while these Azure functions, they're doing all the heavy lifting in the background.
Exactly.
The article also talks about Azure storage, specifically Azure Blob Storage. Why is having this scalable cloud storage so important for building PWAs?
Right. Azure Storage, it's basically Microsoft's version of this giant adaptable storage space in the cloud, right? And blob storage is like the perfect spot for keeping all the core pieces of a PWA. your HTML files, your CSS, JavaScript code, all the stuff that makes it work.
Okay.
And the scalable part means it can grow with the PWA. So as it gets more complex or attracts more users, which means more files, Azure Storage can handle it, no problem.
So if my PWA goes viral, I don't have to worry about like running out of storage space.
Exactly. And beyond just storage, it's designed for speed too, because your PWA needs those core files to load almost instantly, and Azure Storage makes sure they're ready to go.
Makes sense. We all know how annoying it is to wait for a website to load. Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
And speaking of speed, the article also mentions Azure CDN, Content Delivery Network. How does that help make PWAs faster for users?
Right. So Azure CDN, think of it like a network of these mini storage units all over the world strategically placed.
Okay.
When you visit a PWA, the CDN delivers all those static files we talked about, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, images, videos from the server that's closest to you physically.
Oh, interesting. So it's not coming from some like central location. It's coming from somewhere closer to me geographically.
Exactly. So instead of that data having to travel like across continents, it's coming from a location much closer, which makes things way faster. It dramatically reduces what we call latency. That's that delay you sometimes experience when you're waiting for something to load online.
Makes sense.
So by caching content closer to users, Azure CDN makes PWAs feel super snappy and responsive, regardless of where you are in the world.
I get it. So even if the PWA is hosted on a server, thousands of miles away, it's still going to feel like it's right next door.
Yeah, like it's hosted in your neighborhood.
Okay, so it's all about that instant local feel.
Absolutely.
Okay, now, last foundational piece the article mentions is Azure DevOps. I know this can get kind of technical, but what does that bring to the table for people building PWAs?
Okay, so Azure DevOps, it's basically a set of tools that are meant to make the whole process of building and updating software much, much smoother. And the key part here, especially for PWAs, is that it supports something called CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Now, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Yeah, so think of CI as like developers regularly combining their code changes into one central place.
Okay.
And CD, that's the part where those changes are automatically released to users.
Gotcha. So it's automating all those steps, like building the PWA, testing it, and then getting that latest version out to everyone.
Exactly. And Azure DevOps provides the tools to do this automatically. So when developers, make improvements, fix bugs, those updates get to you faster, more consistently, more reliably.
So it's like a well-oiled machine, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It reduces the chances of things breaking and makes sure that you're getting the best possible version of the app.
Okay, cool. So we've looked at all these core components that Azure has to offer for building PWAs. Now let's talk about the big advantages, the big benefits that this brings, specifically for PWAs. The article points these out. The first one is scalability. We touched on this with App Service, but I think it's worth kind of diving a little deeper. Why is Azure's ability to scale so important?
Right. Scalability, remember, it just means that the platform can handle changes in the number of people using the PWA. Whether that's a sudden increase or a decrease, it can adapt.
Okay.
So imagine your PWA goes viral, right? Suddenly you go from having a handful of users to thousands, maybe even millions of users overnight. Azure's infrastructure can automatically add more computing power, more storage, more network capacity, all that to handle that surge in demand.
So it's like it has an endless supply of resources on tap, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's all automatic. And just as important, if the usage drops off, it can scale back down to save resources and optimize costs.
So you're not paying for what you're not using.
Exactly. And this is huge for developers because they can focus on just creating a great app without having to constantly worry about, oh, can my servers handle this? What if we get too much traffic? It just takes that worry off the table.
So it really gives them peace of mind.
It does, yeah.
Especially for new projects, small teams.
Absolutely.
Okay, next advantage the article highlights is security. We all know how important security is these days. So what kind of security benefits does Azure offer for PWAs?
Well, Azure offers a whole suite of security features built right in. You've got encryption, which scrambles your data to keep it safe while it's traveling over the internet or stored on Azure servers. There's identity management, which controls who can access what, and network security measures to protect against those nasty cyber threats and unauthorized access.
So developers building PWAs on Azure, they get all of this kind of baked in.
They do, yeah. It's a strong security foundation right from the start, which is so crucial for protecting both the app itself and, of course, user data.
Absolutely. Now, another thing the article mentions is Azure's global reach. What's the benefit there, both for the people making PWAs and for the people using them?
Right. So this goes back to what we talked about with the CDN, with Microsoft having this vast network of data centers all over the world.
Hmm.
By hosting their PWA on Azure, developers can tap into that network to deliver faster loading times, more reliable access to users, no matter where they are located.
Makes sense.
Think about it. If your PWA has users in Europe, Asia, North America, you don't want to host it on a single server, say in the US.
Right, because those folks in Europe and Asia are going to have a slower experience.
Exactly. It's going to be sluggish.
Yeah.
But Azure lets developers deploy their PWAs in regions closer to their users, which makes a huge difference in terms of performance and that overall experience.
It's all about making that experience smooth no matter where you are.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally, the article talks about cost effectiveness. How does Azure help keep the costs down for building PWAs?
So the key here is Azure's pricing model. It's pay as you go.
Okay.
Unlike traditional hosting, where you might pay a fixed monthly fee for a certain amount of resources, even if you don't use them all with Azure, you only pay for what you actually use.
Okay, so it's like a utility bill.
It's exactly like a utility bill. You pay for the electricity you consume.
I like that.
So if your PWA is just starting out, you don't have a ton of users yet, your costs are going to be much lower.
Makes sense.
And as your app grows, gains traction, you can scale up your usage. And yes, your cost will go up, but it's directly tied to your success.
So there's no, like, huge upfront investment to worry about.
Exactly. And that makes it much less risky for startups, small businesses, individual developers. It's a much more appealing way to get started.
So it really lowers that barrier to entry, which is good for everyone.
Absolutely. It fosters innovation.
Yeah, more people can bring their ideas to life.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've explored the foundational stuff, the big advantages of Azure. Now let's bring it back to the listener. How does all this technical stuff translate into a better experience for you when you're actually using a PWA built on Azure?
Well, ultimately, it means a smoother, more reliable, and faster experience. We talked about those super fast loading times thanks to Azure Storage and CDN, less waiting, more immediate access to the information you need. Plus, Azure's infrastructure and scalability mean that the PWA is much less likely to crash or be unavailable, even if there are a ton of people using it.
Okay.
And, of course, that consistent experience across devices, which is a core part of what makes PWAs so great.
Right.
Azure supports that really, really well. So it's a more polished, more dependable experience no matter how you're accessing the app.
So a PWA built on Azure should just feel more like a natural part of your digital life.
It should, yeah. Reliable, quick, whether you're on your phone with a spotty connection or on your laptop with super fast internet.
It just works.
It just works. And when you think about the scalability, the global reach that Azure offers developers, it really does open up some interesting possibilities. What kind of new web experiences might we see as these infrastructure challenges become less of a barrier?
That's a great question. More complex apps, more globally accessible apps, things we haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly. It's exciting to think about.
It is. Okay, so to sum it all up, it sounds like Azure offers a pretty comprehensive, powerful set of tools for building these progressive web apps. It simplifies development, it boosts performance, it ensures strong security, and it even helps manage costs effectively.
Absolutely. Azure really provides that strong foundation that lets developers focus on creativity, innovation, and building those engaging PWA experiences without getting bogged down in the technical details.
And ultimately, it benefits the user, which is what matters most.
Exactly.
It's really fascinating to think about how PWAs, especially as they get more and more sophisticated, are kind of blurring the lines between traditional websites and native apps.
Yeah.
The ones we download from app stores. Maybe the next must-have app you discover won't even require a visit to the app store.
It's definitely something to consider. What seamless web experiences await you in the future?
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Exactly.
Thanks for diving into this with me.
My pleasure.
And for you listening, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.